Every developer on Earth trusts GitHub with their code. Private repos, API keys, proprietary algorithms, billion-dollar code bases, all sitting behind a login screen and the assumption that GitHub's infrastructure is secure. On April 29th, security firm Wiz proved that assumption wrong. CVE-2026-3854, a critical command injection vulnerability in GitHub's internal Git proxy. The exploit? A single Git push. One authenticated push from any GitHub user could execute arbitrary commands on GitHub's backend servers, with access to millions of public and private repositories. GitHub patched their hosted platform in under 2 hours, but 88% of self-hosted GitHub Enterprise Server instances still unpatched right now. To understand why this is so dangerous, you need to know about a piece of GitHub infrastructure that almost nobody outside of GitHub has ever heard of: babeld. It's GitHub's internal Git proxy. Every time you push code, pull a repo, or clone a project, your Git commands don't go directly to the storage layer. They pass through babeld first. It's the traffic cop that routes every single Git operation across GitHub's backend. The vulnerability was a command injection in how babeld processed certain Git push payloads. Wiz's researchers found that by crafting a specific push request, they could inject shell commands directly into the processing pipeline. The commands would execute on the GitHub backend server handling that request, with the same privileges babeld runs under. Let me say that again. A normal, authenticated GitHub user, anyone with a free account, could craft a Git push that would give them shell access to GitHub's infrastructure. Not admin access, not some elevated permission, just a regular push to a regular repo. From there, an attacker could read source code from any repository hosted on the same node. Private repos, internal tools, proprietary code, all accessible. And because GitHub distributes repositories across a fleet of backend servers, a sustained attack could potentially reach a significant fraction of all repositories on the platform. This wasn't a theoretical vulnerability. Wiz built a working proof of concept. They demonstrated full command execution on GitHub's backend. The only reason this didn't become the biggest code theft in history is that Wiz found it first. Here's where the story gets both reassuring and terrifying. Wiz reported the vulnerability to GitHub on March 4th, 2026. GitHub's security team triaged it immediately and deployed a fix to github.com, the hosted platform, in under 2 hours. That's an exceptional response time. For a vulnerability this critical, 2 hours from report to production patch is genuinely impressive. But github.com is only half the story. GitHub Enterprise Server, the self-hosted version that companies run on their own infrastructure, that's a completely different deployment cycle. Enterprise patches don't auto-deploy. Someone at each company has to download the update, test it, schedule a maintenance window, and apply it. When Wiz published their full disclosure on April 29th, their scanning data showed that 88% of GitHub Enterprise Server instances accessible on the public internet had not applied the patch. 25 days after the fix was available, nearly 2 months after the vulnerability was reported. That means right now, thousands of companies are running GitHub Enterprise servers that are vulnerable to a single push remote code execution exploit. And now that the full technical details are public, including enough information for a competent attacker to reproduce the exploit, the clock is ticking. The source code sitting on those servers? That's the intellectual property of Fortune 500 companies, defense contractors, financial institutions, and healthcare systems. GitHub vulnerabilities happen. Software has bugs. What makes CVE 2026-3854 different is the attack surface and the simplicity. Most critical infrastructure vulnerabilities require some degree of sophistication. You need to chain multiple exploits, bypass security controls, establish persistence. This one required a Git push, a command that every developer runs dozens of times a day. The most basic, mundane operation in software development, and it could have been weaponized by anyone with a free GitHub account. The attack surface is unprecedented. GitHub hosts over 400 million repositories. It's the central nervous system of modern software development. When we talk about supply chain attacks, poisoning NPM packages, injecting malware into open source libraries, those attacks target individual projects. This vulnerability targeted the platform itself, the entire repository layer. And this comes during what security researchers are calling the April supply chain siege. In the same month, we've seen a CVSS 9.8 authentication bypass in cPanel, the hosting control panel that runs millions of websites. A vulnerability in Cursor, the AI code editor, where cloning a malicious repo gives the attacker full code execution on your machine. An unpatched RCE in Hugging Face's robotics framework that's been known about for 9 months. The pattern is clear. The developer toolchain is under attack. Not the code developers write, the tools they use to write it, the platforms they deploy to, the editors they type in, the hosting panels that serve their websites. GitHub is the biggest domino in that chain. And for a brief window, it was one Git push away from falling. The 88% number deserves its own section because it exposes a problem that's bigger than GitHub. We have a systemic enterprise patching crisis, and it's getting worse. When a vulnerability is disclosed, there's a race between defenders and attackers. Defenders need to read the advisory, understand the impact, test the patch, schedule the deployment, and apply it. Attackers need to read the advisory and write an exploit. Guess which side moves faster? disclosure. The average time to exploit a newly disclosed vulnerability has dropped from 32 days in 2023 to under 5 days in 2026. Meanwhile, the average time to patch a critical vulnerability in enterprise environments is still measured in weeks. Some organizations take months. With CVE 2026-3854, GitHub gave enterprise admins 25 days of lead time before full disclosure. The patch was available, the advisory was clear, the severity was unmistakable, and 88% of public-facing instances still didn't patch. This isn't a GitHub problem, this is an industry problem. The same pattern plays out with every critical CVE. The patch is available, the advisory says critical, and thousands of organizations simply don't apply it until it's too late, or until they show up on a breach notification list. If you're running GitHub Enterprise Server, stop this video and check your version. I'm serious. The technical details are now public. Exploit code will follow if it hasn't already. The window between vulnerability disclosed and actively exploited in the wild is measured in days, not weeks. Every one of those 88% of unpatched servers is a target. One Git push. That's all it would have taken to access millions of private repositories on the platform where most of the world's software lives. Wiz found it first. GitHub fixed their hosted platform in 2 hours, but 88% of enterprise servers are still running vulnerable code, and now the full exploit details are public. The developer toolchain is the new attack surface. Not your code, not your app, the platform underneath it all. And this month proved that nobody, not GitHub, not cPanel, not your AI code editor, is immune. If you're a developer, check your GitHub Enterprise version. If you're a security team, this is your wake-up call. And if you want to stay ahead of what's actually happening in cybersecurity and tech, subscribe. We break it down every single day. I'll see you tomorrow.